My name is Sergei Kan, teach anthropology on related subjects at Dartmouth College. I have been involved with studying the history and the culture of the Tlingit people, particularly of Sitka, since 1979, and have very close ties with a number of elders, many of whom are passed, but also Tlingit folks who are still around, and many are in this room, which makes me very, very happy. And a special treat for me is that my former Dartmouth student, Sabina Allen's here. She's Betty Allen's granddaughter. And I'm glad she's continuing the work in Sitka that I started. I'm going to talk about Merrill and his photographs. Many of you, particularly if you live in Sitka, know some of them or seen some of them, but the entire collection has never been published, discussed, except briefly in a book by Sharon Gmelch, which I used but also have some strong disagreements with. This project is a kind of a foretaste of a book that I'm about to publish called The Tlingit in Sitka, the photography of Elbridge W.Merrill. It's coming out in February with the University of Washington Press, and also supported by Alaska Heritage and Dartmouth College. If you're interested, you can pre-order the book on Amazon. So this is a little bit of a commercial here. The quote from Merrill, I think, speaks for itself. I really like it. I like to think my pictures go out into the world, taking the healing spirit of my country to those who need it, to those who understand it. I will argue that even though Merrill was not a native or indigenous person, he had tremendous respect for the Tlingit people, for their arts, for their way of life, as well as was in love with the beautiful natural setting of Sitka and Southeast Alaska. And all around, very interesting person. I'll briefly compare him with a couple of other well-known Alaska non-native photographers, and I think in those comparisons he comes out on top. So who was he? Why are his photographs of Tlingit people are so important and unique? What do I do with my... Pardon?
Do you want to, so we can see better?
Oh,
that?
yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah. So, I did something with my... the text of my paper. It was here a minute ago. That's weird. I think it's in here. Yeah. Okay. So Elbridge Merrill was born in 1870 in West Newbury, Massachusetts, outside of Boston. His parents were descendants of English settlers who came to the New World in the 17th century. His early life was quite difficult. When he was only 3, his father died, and his mother, with her 3 children, including Elbridge, had to move to Danvers, another suburb of Boston, to live with her brother. Elbridge's name appears for the first time in the Denver City Directory, with his occupation being listed as a necktie cutter. So that was his job. His mother also made ties, and that's how they made a living. But in 1890, at age 20, he already began experimenting with photography. And his earliest known photographs are of his relatives, Denver's 4th of July parade, the fire department, and so forth. They're actually pretty nice photographs, and I was able to look at them, see them in the Denver City Archives. Unfortunately, there's only a limited number of photographs that we could include in the book, so they're not going to be there. The most beautiful picture of all in that Denver's collection is that of a young girl reading a book. That's really pretty. So by 1895, he's listed in the Denver's directory of businesses as an artist or a photo printer. In 1898, like many other Euro-Americans, Merrill learned about the gold rush in Klondike in the Yukon Territory of Canada. He was attracted by the opportunity to improve his financial situation and the chance to take pictures of Canada and Alaska nature, natural beauty, diehard sourdoughs, and native people of those two countries. According to several oral traditions in Sitka, Merrill arrived in our town in 1898 aboard a small steamer called Gertrude, which entered Sitka Sound and eventually died on the beach there. He decided to proceed from Sitka to Klondike and bought several, and did that with several cameras that he brought to Alaska. But within a year, and certainly by 1900, when he was 30 years old, he settled in Sitka. It seems that the first clearly identified photograph by Merrill made in Sitka is called Potlatch Dancers in the Winter. And the copyright for it on the picture is 1899. I don't have that picture. The quality is not very good, but it looks like it's a group of Tlingit people dancing outdoors, most likely in the park, what became the park. So sometime in late 1899 or early 1900, Merrill settled in Sitka for good. And he never left. He was really a kind of a homebody, except occasionally going to Juneau on business. In late December 1900 issue of the newspaper Alaskan, local newspaper, we read that, quote, E.W. Merrill, photographist, has a quantity of first-class negatives from which he can supply orders for views of Sitka and vicinity. His first studio was located in the old Trading Post building on Lincoln Street, old Russian building. The early years in Sitka must have been pretty hard for him. People who Sharon Melch interviewed remembered him as working as a clerk, even working on Christmas in a local store. But in 1905, he moved to a bigger store/gallery located in the Tilson building on Lincoln Street, so downtown. There he displayed his photographs. You can see them on the top there, as well as a variety of Tlingit artifacts. From that time on, and until his death in the late 1920s, so for 30 years, he advertised in the local paper as E.W. Merrill Photography, as well as E.W. Merrill, dealer in Alaskan curios and photographs. Judging by the number of portraits and other photographs he took in Sitka, of Sitka's community members, it is quite clear that he was able to establish a very good rapport with a variety of townspeople, including the Tlingit, the Russian Creoles, and white Americans, and ranging from working class people to wealthy folks like W. Mills and others. Doris Grundy, who came to Sitka with her family in 1918 at age 1 and lived there for 17 years, remembered Merrill as a tall, handsome man with long, flowing black hair who walked through town with what she called aristocratic, straight-back manner, had a long black rain cape over his shoulders, a kind of a romantic figure. He was usually accompanied by a rover his beloved collie dog, which appeared in several photographs. Although a proud loner, Merrill was known to enjoy talking to kids. He always stopped and shared treats with them. As Grundis told her interviewer, quote, Merrill was an articulate person, an artist in every sense of the word. He was a person, a presence. He was somebody very special. He was highly respected by the native and non-native community. Leslie Yaw, whom this building is named after, who came to Sitka in 23, reminisced that Merrill, quote, did not have the racial prejudice that many white people in Sitka at that time had. He was definitely solitary and mysterious, friendly, but solitary and mysterious. A number of people who remembered him and referred to him respectfully as Mr. Merrill, and this includes Tlingit people, commented that he didn't have too many friends in town. But still, it's known that he pitched in a baseball team during the early years in town and took part in several community undertakings and organizations, including serving on the election board and being involved in organizing the Memorial Day Parade. He considered himself an artist, and many of the people who knew him agreed. He was also a painstaking nature photographer. As Robert D. Armand wrote, quote, in his photography, Merrill had infinite patience and would wait for days to get exactly the right cloud formation on mountain or the water reflections exactly as he would want them. He was technically skilled in both taking but also printing his photographs. And these are glass plates. And of course, I should have mentioned that the majority of his pictures are now at the National Park, Sitka National Historical Park. And then some are also at the Alaska State Archive. And then there are also pictures in private possession in Sitka and elsewhere, which a couple of them I will be featuring in the book. His biggest fashion and the main subject of his pictures was Sitka's native people, their culture, their way of life, their art. And I think the second favorite subject was nature. Unfortunately, we cannot print his nature photography. See, Alaska Heritage insisted that we only include pictures of native people, but maybe some other scholar would look at his and reprint his nature photography, which I think is quite outstanding. There have been speculations about Merrill's private life, and at least two women have been linked to him, although we don't have any solid evidence what the relationship was. One was I'll come back to that. Merrill found nature to be a source of spiritual healing and wisdom. You saw that in the quote that I started with. His favorite activity was watching sunset over Mount Edgecombe. In fact, some of his friends and acquaintances considered him a pantheist who believed in the presence of God or of some kind of higher power in our mountains and forests. Eventually, he built himself a cabin near Sitka on the back slope of Mount Verstovia, which he named Hideaway. From there, he often went hunting, fishing, relying heavily on these activities for food, subsistence, just like his Tlingit neighbors did. Sometime later, he built another cabin called Ferndale, located in Jamestown Bay. Just a simple two-room cabin hidden behind bushes and ferns, and it could only be reached by trail or by boat. Here he is with some of his friends. He's on the far right, and then the other guy's on the left, and they must have gone duck hunting. Merrill is definitely known, especially for his wonderful, beautiful, interesting, historic pictures of local people, especially Tlingit, who clearly had a very special place in his heart. He collected a variety of artifacts and art objects made by Tlingit craftspeople, men and women, Tlingit artists. And it's known that he knew how to sing Tlingit songs. I have an impression from what I could gather that he did have some command of Tlingit language, though he wasn't fluent. He hunted regularly with one Tlingit man, whose name we do not know, unfortunately. And then the son of this Tlingit friend of Merrill's helped him in his photographic work. The Tlingit called him father of pictures. And this is a typical Tlingit tradition where it's a fancy anthropological term for this is technonymy, and it means that someone who is good at something, really good at something, or is identified with something closely, is called father of. So a well-known man in Juneau who purchased furs from Tlingit people was called father of mink. So Merrill was father of pictures. It seems that he probably had another Tlingit name, but unfortunately we don't know what it was. The fact that several Tlingit elders, men and women, attended his funeral suggests that he did have friends among them and they had a good feeling about him. Merrill's interest in native culture, Tlingit and other Alaska native cultures, went beyond collecting and photographing. In 1906, he organized the restoration work on the Haida totem poles that were returned to Sitka following their display at the Louisiana Purchase Expo in St. Louis in 1904 and the Lewis and Clark Exposition in Portland, Oregon in 1905. The day the ship arrived with the poles, Merrill went to Governor Brady and his sons on a walk along Indian River and to discuss the best location for placing the poles in the park. Afterward, he worked with a dozen Tlingit craftsmen, carvers, to repair and paint the poles. In 1913, he repainted some of the poles himself, and for many years he was considered the unofficial caretaker of the Sitka National Historical Park and received a symbolic nominal salary of $12 a year. He was also an advocate of making the park a national monument. By the way, Emily Moore's wonderful book on the CCC work of Tlingit carvers, I think, goes into much greater detail about what I just mentioned. Unfortunately, we're limited in time, and I can't spend time today identifying the Tlingit men and women that he photographed. I'll mention a few, but we actually have the identity of each of these guys. And I have to thank profusely from the bottom of my heart, my friend and also relative, again through adoption, Harold Jacobs, who helped me identify many of the Tlingit people. And there were a few other folks like Herman Davis and several other elders who helped identifying. And my goal was to identify every single person, if possible, that was photographed. I think that's extremely important, just like Megan's insisting on identifying every single Tlingit piece of beadwork. And not only their English name, but most importantly, Tlingit name, house and clan. And that was Harold's contribution. And then I would go to Ancestry.com and look at dates of birth and death. I think this will make the book particularly useful and interesting to the Native community here. Now, Merrill obviously knew that tourists, as well as some of the local non-Native residents who had money and liked collecting photographs, were intrigued by the images of Sitka's indigenous residents dressed in beautiful traditional regalia. Of course, this was the era when romanticized images of Native Americans were in great demand, even as their political power and their land base were being diminished by American government and its non-Native citizens. Yet it is hard for me to believe that Merrill took so many pictures of the Tlingit people solely because there was a market for them. What we do know that many of the pictures of Tlingit Sitkans, or what I would call first Sitkans, were actually made upon their request. And they bought these photographs and displayed them in their homes. Unfortunately, we don't know the name of the gentleman and probably his wife on the left. And this is a picture from University of Washington archive. So I didn't mention it, but about half a dozen pictures in my book will be from that archive. The gentleman on the right is Jacob Gunáak'w, and I think that's Brian's name. A very prominent Tlingit aristocrat, high-ranking gentleman, and also the president of St. Michael's Christian Orthodox Brotherhood, which is indicated by his medals, and then the sash is the Brotherhood sash. He was one of the very prominent leaders in the Russian Orthodox community in Sitka. What's, I think, distinct about Merrill is that he did not limit his photographs to depicting Tlingit people wearing traditional clothing. Obviously, that kind of a picture, like the gentleman on the left, would appeal, and this is Silver Jim of the cow house of the Skagway clan, Kitchko. That's the kind of picture that would appeal to, of course, to him and his family, but also non-native collectors. But Merrill was just as interested in photographing native people the way they wanted to be photographed. So just like this picture, this couple clearly dressed in festive attire, maybe on a Sunday going to church or whatever, or Gunáak'w wearing his bow tie and his suit, or these young men wearing casual clothes. That's the way they wanted to be photographed. The gentleman on the far left is Scotty James of the Tucktain Tan, and the guy next to him with the cap is probably his brother. I don't know the identity of the other folks. Some of his pictures were taken in a studio, like this wonderful picture of Lillian Cook of the little Coho house of the Gunáak'w, or the woman on the right, Mary Willard Tle, of Kagwantan clan of Klakwan. These are studio portraits, but you can't say that they're staged. They are, again, the way they are portrayed the way the people themselves wanted to be photographed. Incidentally, Mary's, the beautiful chilkat blanket that she made is what she's displaying here. And I want to very briefly contrast his pictures with other photographers. I'm going to run over time a little bit, but we have a big break after my paper and then Lucy's paper, so I hope that's okay. She doesn't look very happy. We all know Curtis, right? A classic. When I first came to the United States in the 70s, a film about Curtis came out. His work was rediscovered, and there was a Curtis cult. You still can buy Curtis prints, original prints, on eBay or online for, a fair amount of money. And he was talented. There's no doubt about it. But his pictures are very romantic. I just used one. They're not condescending or prejudiced, but they're definitely staged. He used props. He sometimes used wigs. Merrill would never do that. And then there's Case and Draper. Case and Draper were commercial photographers in Juneau and Skagway, and many of their pictures are of Tlingit people in kind of normal situations, portraits or people doing subsistence work. But once in a while, they produced these rather offensive pictures. The shaman on the left it's a staged photograph. There were no shamans left in Juneau by this time, or if they were, they would not want to be photographed. So Merrill never had any pictures of shamans or icht. And then my least favorite is the girl on the right, is Tlingit, we know because she appears in other photographs, but he dressed her up in some kind of pseudo Yupik or Inupiaq attire, a bear skin, and she's got snowshoes and a spear. And I think this is a perfect example of depicting savagery or primitivism. This is a Tlingit woman or a Native Alaskan, generic Native Alaskan woman. That's what I think the non-Native audience kind of expected. And he gave her a made-up name that makes absolutely no sense in Tlingit. There are also several photographs I cannot show of Tlingit women bare-chested. And this is what I would call, by the same photographer, kind of Klondike Gold Rush pornography. And it's something that has to be acknowledged. It's unfortunate, but it probably made money because these lonely gold miners, like to look at these pictures of semi-nude women, particularly Native women. So again, savagery and a kind of savage eroticism. And that kind of stuff would be anathema to Merrill. He would be probably disgusted with that. So now let's look at the most important pictures of Merrill. And those, of course, the kind of the cream of the crop of his collection are the pictures of the 1904 Gunáak'w in Sitka, later referred to as the last potlatch, which we know was not the last, but it was probably the last in the sense of number of people participating, guests from all over Southeast, particularly Klakwan, Angun, etc., Juneau. The number of people in Sitka, the length of the celebrations. There was a major Kagwantankoich, but then there are other ceremonies, and it was like from Christmas into January of 2004. And he took a lot of pictures. One of the most best known is this wonderful picture of the Kagwantan leaders of the Wolf House who sponsored the potlatch. And this is going to be the cover of the book. It's an iconic photograph of these aristocratic gentlemen, proud, with that sleeping wolf paw that now is at the park on loan from Kagwantan. But they raised it in front of their house on the occasion of the ceremony. These pictures, the top group of young men mostly, their co-host, Gunáak'w. It's interesting that if you look at the two men on the left, they're wearing neckties. So they were dressed probably underneath the Chilkat blanket, they were dressed as Westerners, as Europeans. And Merrill is not trying to indicate that they're so traditional that they don't wear modern clothing. Or the gentleman, it's a very prominent Koho Gunáak'w leader from Yakutat. He's wearing glasses. So again, I don't have time, but most of the people in these two photographs, Harold and we were able to identify. So ceremonial pictures, right? And yet we have these lovely pictures of kids that the one on the top, I think is just magnificent. These little guys, and parents or relatives put these hats on them, probably because they were from the right clan. So this is no joke. But the girls are dressed as American, little kids. And then this is a very famous picture of a boy in a canoe. And again, I think it's one of his loveliest depictions of kids. And I think the fact that he liked children speaks for itself. This is what the cover of the book would look like. We were trying to imitate the colors of Tlingit blankets. Now, he didn't just photograph portraits or ceremonial pictures. He also gave us a record of Tlingit men and women at work, weaving baskets, scraping a seal skin. This is all in the Sitka village. Tlingit men just come back from fishing, and the guy in the front, that was my timer. The guy in the front's cutting a fish, and this gentleman is a carver. In addition to pictures from 1904 potlatch and portraits of individual Tlingit, we have a large series of photographs of the school, Sitka Industrial Training School, later known as Sheldon Jackson. I only used a few, and because he was here from 1899 to 1929, we have a 30-year period, and you can see in the photographs that the clothing of the kids changes, the teachers' clothing changes, the activities change. This is my favorite picture. This is the first graduating high school class of Sheldon Jackson. This is A.D. Johnson, Franco Williams Sr., Father Franco Williams, and a number of other well-known Sitka and other Southeast Alaskan. Nice thing about Sheldon Jackson collection of student pictures is these young people came from all over. They're not just Sitka. They were involved in some sort of a romantic production of a play taking place in Scotland. It's called Lady of the Lake. And again, I think it shows that they were doing modern things and they enjoyed them. He also took pictures of Tlingit students learning. They're doing carpentry. There are pictures of girls learning baking and things like that. This is a Gilbert and Sullivan production. And again, I think when we hear some young historians and radicals saying this was a horrible place, it was a jail, they were all abused, I say, yes, there were a lot of bad things, but this is, I think they had a good time performing Gilbert and Sullivan. I mean, you can't imagine that this was like a chore or a boring thing. Then he also took pictures of the cottage community. And this is the community that graduates of Sheldon Jackson built on this side of Sitka. And it's a very important community. Again, we identified all of these people. I just mentioned a few. This is John Cameron, and Mrs. Sloan, his wife, Tilly Hope, of course, Peter Simpson, one of his daughters, Ray James, I think, is here, David Howard. These folks were identified by Carol Brady, who have been mentioned already in another presentation. And then, of course, we have a few very important photographs by Merrill of Alaska Native Brotherhood. This is an early picture. Again, for this one, we have pretty much everyone identified. And there were others. I also found one single early photograph of the Alaska Native Sisterhood. This is a lovely portrait of Pauline James and Albert James. And Gilbert Truitt said, oh, those are my maternal grandparents. So that's really wonderful. They were SJ graduates as well, and they lived in the cottages. Now, of course, there are also church groups, and it's interesting that I haven't found a single photograph of Tlingit people who were members of the Presbyterian Church, and maybe they didn't have such impressive collective sort of self-representations. But Orthodox, we have about half a dozen. The one on the bottom is 1916. Two brotherhoods, St. Michael with the sashes going this way, St. Gabriel crossed, and then their flags, Father Kashavarov, various other Russian priests, Creole boys, the Kostomitna boys, and a lot of well-known Tlingit folks. I showed this picture to several Tlingit elders in 1980 when I was here for the first time, and they identified them. So today it would have been much harder to do this kind of identification, but Charlie Dick, James Howard, and many, many others. Peter James, I think, is a little boy. Peter James, about one time. This is a wonderful picture of a Russian priest. He's standing on that platform, blessing Tlingit fishing boats in the spring when they're about to go out. And it shows how important this was for the native community. I'm almost done. I would say that overall, the way I see his portrayal of Tlingit people, respectful portrayal of people who are dignified, proud, who know who they are. They're not victims. And again, here I part company with some of the scholars who work on Native American photography today and argue that the camera by a white photographer exploited the native subject. I don't see it here. This is not, maybe he did exploit in some cases, but in his case, it was a story of a native life as he saw it. Tlingit, Creole. There are also a series of very nice pictures of white people, Americans, children, adults. And the book will have an introduction talking about history of the Native community. And I'm really happy I was able to do it. I think we owe it to Merrill that he left us this legacy.
Yes.
And we should thank him, and he will forever remain the father of pictures. And you know about that plaque at the park with his name that was done in the 30s, I think. Thank you very much.